Part 1. The stars looked cold and distant from the command deck of the Dominion Spire. Emperor Vralthun stood before the massive viewing window, his crystalline body reflecting the light of 1,000 distant suns. Behind him, his generals and advisors waited in silence. They knew better than to speak before their emperor did. Vralthun turned slowly, his 4 eyes scanning the assembled officers. His empire stretched across 47 star systems. Billions of beings bowed to his rule. Entire species had been broken under his military might. Yet he always wanted more. Expansion was not just a policy for the Zetharian Empire. It was their nature. A holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the chamber. It showed a small blue and green planet orbiting a yellow star. The world looked peaceful, almost fragile, spinning quietly in the darkness of space. "This is Earth," announced General Corax, stepping forward. He was tall even for a Zetharian, his armor scarred from countless battles. Home to a species called humans. They have recently developed primitive, faster-than-light travel. Our scouts report a population of approximately 8 billion. Vralthun moved closer to the hologram, studying the planet with interest. What are their military capabilities? Corax made a dismissive gesture with his clawed hand. Minimal, my emperor. They have basic energy weapons and a small fleet of outdated vessels. Their technology is at least 2 centuries behind our own. They have no unified planetary government, and their military forces are fragmented across multiple nations. Another general, Thrix, added his assessment. Their worlds would make excellent colony sites, rich in minerals, abundant water, and a comfortable atmosphere for many of our subject races. The humans themselves could serve as laborers in our mining operations. Vralthun remained silent for a long moment, considering. Then he turned to face Corax directly. "General, you have served me faithfully for 30 years. You crushed the rebellion on Canthor Prime. You brought the Selvian Confederacy to its knees. I entrust you with this task." Corax bowed low, one fist pressed against his chest plate. "I am honored, my emperor." "Take your fleet to this Earth," Vralthun commanded, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Break their defenses. Scatter their military. Bring me these humans as slaves. Show them that resistance against the Zetharian Empire is futile. Make an example of them that will be remembered across the galaxy." "It shall be done," Corax replied. "How many soldiers should I bring?" "How many do you need to conquer a primitive world?" Vralthun asked, a hint of amusement in his tone. Corax calculated quickly. 200 warships. 50,000 ground troops. We will have the planet secured within 1 standard cycle. Then go, General. I want to see results quickly. Corax bowed again and left the chamber, already planning his campaign. Behind him, Emperor Vralthun returned to the viewing window, gazing out at the endless stars. Soon 1 more world would fall under his control. 1 more species would learn to fear his name. 3 weeks later, Corax's fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. The massive warships hung in the darkness like predators watching their prey. On the bridge of his flagship, the Crimson Talon, Corax studied the tactical displays with satisfaction. "Begin the advance," he ordered. "Target their orbital defense stations first. I want their eyes blinded before they can mount any organized response." The Zetharian fleet moved forward like a wave of darkness. Earth's early warning systems detected them immediately, and alarm signals flashed across military installations worldwide. But detection and defense were 2 very different things. At the North American Aerospace Defense Command, Admiral Jack Porter watched the incoming threat with growing dread. He was a 30-year veteran who had seen humanity through wars, disasters, and the development of their first FTL engines. But nothing had prepared him for this. "Sir, we're detecting 200 capital ships," reported Captain Lisa Hayes, her voice tight with stress. "They're targeting our satellites and orbital platforms. Defensive batteries are engaging, but their shields are holding." Jack grabbed the communications console. "Get me the president. Alert all allied nations. Launch every ship we have and scramble all fighter squadrons. This is not a drill." Within minutes, Earth's defense fleet scrambled into action. 147 ships of various classes launched from bases across the planet. They were humanity's pride, built from technology barely a decade old. Advanced fusion drives pushed them through space. Particle beam weapons and missile batteries armed them for combat, but they might as well have been throwing rocks. The first engagement lasted 11 minutes. Zetharian weapons carved through human shields like they were made of paper. Energy beams vaporized hulls. Missiles exploded harmlessly against alien defensive screens. Within that first quarter hour, 42 human ships were destroyed. Captain Greg Barnes piloted the destroyer Phoenix through the chaos, dodging enemy fire with desperate skill. His crew fought back with everything they had, but their weapons barely scratched the enemy vessels. "All ships, fall back to defensive position Beta." Jack's voice crackled over the communications channel. "We need to regroup," but there was no regrouping. Korax had planned his assault perfectly. While the main fleet engaged Earth's ships in space, smaller vessels bypassed the battle entirely and headed straight for the planet. Within hours, dropships were landing in major cities across the globe. In New York, Marine Sergeant Danny Mitchell led his unit through streets filled with fleeing civilians. Overhead, Zetharian fighters screamed past, their weapons tearing apart buildings with casual ease. Danny had served in conflicts across 3 continents, but this was different. This was an invasion from the stars. "Fall back to the subway stations," Danny shouted to his squad. "Get the civilians underground." A Zetharian soldier appeared at the end of the street, standing nearly 8 feet tall in powered armor. It raised its rifle and fired. The energy blast struck a car, and the vehicle exploded in a ball of flame. Danny and his Marines returned fire, but their bullets sparked off the aliens' shields. "We need heavier weapons," yelled Corporal Amy Collins, diving behind a concrete barrier. "We need a miracle," Danny replied, but he kept firing anyway. Across the planet, similar scenes played out. In London, Tokyo, Moscow, and 100 other cities, human forces fought with everything they had. But courage and determination could not overcome such a vast technological advantage. The Zetharian advance was unstoppable. By the end of the first day, Earth's orbital defenses were completely destroyed. By the end of the second day, most of the human fleet had been reduced to floating debris. By the end of the third day, Zetharian forces controlled every major city on the planet. General Korax stood in the ruins of what had once been the United Nations building in New York. Around him, his soldiers were rounding up prisoners and establishing control points. The conquest had been even easier than he had predicted. His communication device chirped, and Emperor Vralthun's image appeared before him. "Report. General. Earth is secured, my Emperor," Korax said with pride. "Their military has been crushed. We are now processing prisoners for transport to the labor colonies. Total casualties on our side, 273 soldiers." "Excellent work," Vralthun replied. "How many humans can you deliver?" "At least 2 million in the first shipment. More will be available once we have fully pacified the remaining resistance cells." "Very good. Proceed with the operation. I want the first transport to arrive within 1 standard month." The communication ended, and Korax looked out over the conquered city. Smoke rose from dozens of fires. Human prisoners were being herded into containment fields. Victory was complete. Yet something troubled the general, though he could not quite identify what it was. The humans had fought desperately, even when defeat was certain. Even now, in the prisoner columns, he saw no broken spirits. Instead, he saw eyes filled with anger and defiance. Korax dismissed the feeling. They were conquered. What could they possibly do now? He would soon find out that he had made a terrible miscalculation. Part 2. The detention camp sprawled across what had once been Central Park in New York. Tall energy barriers hummed with power, creating cages that held thousands of humans. Zetharian guards patrolled the perimeter, their weapons ready, though they seemed almost bored. To them, these primitive creatures posed no threat. Danny Mitchell sat on the ground, his back against a concrete slab that had once been part of a monument. His uniform was torn and dirty, and dried blood crusted on his forehead from a wound he had received during the last battle. Around him, other prisoners huddled in small groups, some crying, others staring blankly at nothing. But Danny was not idle. His eyes constantly moved, observing the guards, noting their patrol patterns, counting the minutes between shift changes. A Marine did not stop being a soldier just because he had been captured. "You're planning something foolish," said a voice beside him. Danny turned to see Dr. Amy Collins sitting down nearby. She was a civilian contractor who had been working with his unit as a medical advisor. Her clothes were as dirty as his, but she had somehow managed to keep her medical bag. "Just looking around," Danny replied quietly. Amy shook her head. "I can see it in your eyes. You want to fight them. But look at them, Danny. Their technology is hundreds of years ahead of ours. What can we possibly do? I do not know yet, Danny admitted. But I know I'm not going to sit here and wait to be shipped off to some alien mine. There has to be a way. In another section of the camp, engineer Ryan Chen was having similar thoughts. He sat with his sister Karen, speaking in whispers while pretending to rest. I managed to hide this before they searched us, Ryan said, showing Karen a small multi-tool he had concealed in his boot. It is not much, but I might be able to use it to access their computer systems if I can get close enough. Karen looked at her brother with concern. That is incredibly dangerous. If they catch you, they will kill you. If they catch me doing nothing, they will work me to death in their minds anyway, Ryan replied. At least this way I am doing something. Father always said that giving up was not in our family's nature. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of more prisoners. Zetharian soldiers herded a new group into the camp, roughly pushing anyone who moved too slowly. Among the newcomers was a young pilot named Greg Barnes, his flight suit torn and his face bruised. Greg stumbled and fell near where Danny was sitting. The Marine quickly moved to help him up. Easy there, flyboy, Danny said, supporting Greg's weight. Thanks, Greg muttered. They shot down my ship. I managed to eject, but barely. How long have you been here? 3 days, Danny replied. What is the situation up there? He gestured toward the sky. Greg's expression grew dark. There is no situation. They destroyed everything. Our fleet is gone. I do not think there is a single human ship left in orbit. The news hit hard, but Danny refused to let despair take hold. Then we find another way to fight. Over the next 2 weeks, something remarkable began to happen in the detention camps. Despite being separated by barriers and guards, the prisoners started to organize. Danny made contact with other military personnel scattered throughout the camp. Ryan used his hidden tools to tap into the power conduits, allowing brief communications between sections. Greg shared his knowledge of Zetharian ship designs, which he had observed during the battles. They were not the only ones resisting. Around the world, in camps from Beijing to London to Sydney, humans were refusing to accept their fate. Small acts of defiance at first. Prisoners who worked slowly. Guards who found their equipment mysteriously malfunctioning. Information being shared through whispered networks. General Corax noticed the problems but dismissed them as minor annoyances. He walked through the New York camp one morning, inspecting the facilities with his second-in-command, Commander Xyloth. The humans are proving to be difficult workers, Xyloth reported. Productivity is below expected levels. We have had to increase guard presence by 20%. Corax frowned. Have you increased discipline measures? We have, General, but it seems to make little difference. They are stubborn creatures. All conquered species resist at first, Corax said dismissively. Once they reach the mining colonies and understand their situation is permanent, they will learn obedience. How many are ready for transport? Just over 2 million across all camps worldwide. We can begin loading the transport ships within 3 days. Corax nodded. Good. The Emperor is eager to see results. Begin preparations immediately. What Corax did not know was that the humans had been waiting for exactly this moment. Danny had assembled a core group of fighters within his section of the camp. They included soldiers, engineers, doctors, and even some civilian volunteers. Each person had a role to play in the desperate plan they had developed. It is insane, whispered Lieutenant Kate Morrison, a former Special Forces officer. Even if we succeed in taking control of one transport, we will be killed the moment we deviate from course. Maybe, Danny agreed. But at least we will die fighting instead of in chains. And maybe, just maybe, we can hurt them badly enough that they think twice about keeping humans as slaves. Amy looked at the group with sad eyes. Many of us will not survive this. I know, Danny said quietly. That is why I am only asking for volunteers. Anyone who wants to stay behind and take their chances in the labor camps can do so. No one will think less of them. But when Danny asked who would volunteer, every single person raised their hand. The preparation was delicate and dangerous. Ryan managed to smuggle messages to his contacts in other camps using the communication network he had built. The plan spread like wildfire through the prisoner population. Not everyone would participate. Not everyone could, but enough would try to make a difference. They gathered whatever they could use as weapons. A piece of metal sharpened against concrete. A chemical mixture that Amy created from medical supplies that could burn through certain materials. Information about Zetharian anatomy and the weak points in their armor, gathered from observations and whispered conversations. 3 days later, the loading process began. Zetharian soldiers moved through the camps, selecting prisoners for transport. Danny, Amy, Ryan, Karen, Greg, and thousands of others allowed themselves to be taken. They walked quietly into the massive transport ships, appearing defeated and broken. The transport vessels were enormous, each capable of carrying 100,000 prisoners. They were loaded into individual stasis pods, designed to keep them unconscious during the journey to the mining colonies. But Danny's group had prepared for this too. Amy had created a compound from various chemicals that could temporarily fool the Zetharian bioscanners. When applied to the skin, it made the person appear to be in stasis when they were actually awake. It was crude and would only work for a few hours, but a few hours was all they needed. As the loading process continued, volunteers in each transport managed to apply the compound without being detected. Guard procedures were lax because the Zetharians never imagined prisoners could threaten them on their own ships. It was this arrogance that would prove to be their downfall. In Transport 7, Danny lay in his pod, his eyes closed but his mind alert. Through the thin walls he could hear the sounds of the ship preparing for launch. Other humans lay in nearby pods, also awake, also waiting. The signal would come soon. Amy, who had managed to get herself assigned as a medical assistant to the Zetharian doctors, would trigger the uprising. Then everything would depend on speed, surprise, and desperate courage. Danny thought about Earth, about the people still trapped there, about the billions who had died in the invasion. He thought about his parents, who he hoped had made it to one of the refugee centers in the mountains. He thought about what it meant to be human, to refuse to surrender even when every logical calculation said you should. The Zetharians had expected them to break. They had expected fear and submission. They were about to learn a hard lesson about humanity. Sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who has nothing left to lose. The transport ships began to lift off, carrying their cargo toward the stars. But these were not the helpless slaves the Zetharians expected. These were humans, and humans had not survived every disaster and challenge in their history by giving up when things looked impossible. In the darkness of his pod, Danny Mitchell smiled. The real war was about to begin. Part 3. The 12 transport ships moved away from Earth in perfect formation, their massive engines pushing them toward the edge of the solar system, where they would make the jump to hyperspace. Inside each vessel, 100,000 humans lay in stasis pods, or at least that was what the Zetharian crew believed. On Transport 7, Amy Collins moved quietly through the medical bay, her heart pounding so hard she was certain the guards could hear it. She wore the simple uniform that the Zetharians had given her, marking her as one of the compliant prisoners allowed to work under supervision. The alien doctors largely ignored her, considering human medical knowledge to be primitive and barely useful. This dismissive attitude was about to cost them everything. Amy approached the central control station, where the stasis systems were monitored. A Zetharian medical officer named Threx sat at the console, reviewing data on a holographic display. He did not even look up as Amy walked past him, carrying a tray of medical supplies. Her hand trembled slightly as she set down the tray. Underneath it, hidden from view, was a small device that Ryan had built from smuggled components. It would override the stasis controls for exactly 4 minutes. 4 minutes to wake 10,000 humans. 4 minutes before the system registered the malfunction and alerted security. Amy pressed the device against the underside of the console and activated it. A tiny magnetic clamp locked it in place. Then she picked up her tray and walked away, forcing herself to move at a normal pace. Threx noticed nothing. Why would he? These humans were beaten, conquered, harmless. 30 seconds later, the device activated. Throughout Transport 7, sedative gas stopped flowing into thousands of pods. Emergency stimulants flooded the systems instead. carefully measured doses that Ryan had calculated would wake people without causing the violent disorientation that usually came from forced awakening. Danny Mitchell's eyes snapped open. For a moment, confusion clouded his mind. Then memory rushed back and training took over. He was in a stasis pod on an alien transport ship. The uprising was beginning. His pod was not designed to be open from the inside, but the Zetharians had not built them to hold fully conscious prisoners either. Danny braced his back against one side and pushed with both legs against the door. The locking mechanism, designed to hold unconscious bodies in place during turbulence, was not strong enough to resist a determined soldier. The pod door burst open with a sharp crack. Danny fell out onto the cold metal floor of the cargo bay. Around him, other pods were opening as well. Men and women stumbled out, some falling, others catching themselves. They looked around in confusion until they saw Danny standing. "Move now," Danny shouted. "Everyone move!" We have minutes before they realize what is happening. The prisoners moved into action. This cargo bay held 5,000 people, but only 200 were in Danny's immediate group of trained fighters. The rest were civilians who had volunteered to take their chances in the uprising rather than face life as slaves. "Greg, get to the flight deck," Danny ordered. "Take your team. Kate, you have the armory. Ryan, engineering. Everyone else with me. We take the bridge." They moved through the ship like a flood, pouring through corridors that the Zetharian crew had never imagined prisoners could access. The first guards they encountered were completely unprepared. 3 armed soldiers turned a corner and found themselves facing dozens of angry humans. The Zetharians raised their weapons, but they hesitated for a crucial second, surprised by what they were seeing. That hesitation was fatal. The humans swarmed over them, bearing them down through sheer numbers. The aliens were stronger and better armored, but they could not fight off 50 people at once. Danny grabbed one of the fallen energy rifles. It was heavy and the grip was designed for larger hands, but it would fire. He did not have time to learn the weapon properly, so he just pointed it and pulled what he hoped was the trigger. A bolt of energy shot down the corridor, scorching the wall. "Good enough," Danny muttered. "Keep moving." Alarms began to blare throughout the ship. The Zetharians now knew they had a problem, but they did not yet understand the scale of what was happening. Security teams rushed toward the cargo bay expecting to contain a small riot. Instead, they ran into an organized assault. Kate Morrison led her team to the armory with brutal efficiency. She had served in 3 war zones and knew that victory went to whoever controlled the weapons. The armory door was sealed, but Ryan had taught them a trick. The Zetharian security systems used electromagnetic locks, and a strong magnetic field could temporarily disrupt them. They had built crude electromagnets from wire torn from the ship's walls and power cells stolen from maintenance areas. It was not elegant, but it worked. The lock clicked open and Kate's team poured into the armory. "Take everything," Kate shouted. "Rifles, grenades, armor if it fits. Move fast." On the flight deck, Greg Barnes fought his way to the pilot station. 2 Zetharian officers tried to stop him, but Greg had learned a few things about hand-to-hand combat during his military training. He ducked under a clawed swipe and drove his shoulder into the alien's midsection. The Zetharian stumbled back and other humans tackled it to the ground. Greg threw himself into the pilot's seat and stared at the controls. He had studied these systems for weeks, watching captured footage and technical diagrams that Ryan had somehow obtained. But knowing something in theory and doing it in practice were very different things. "Come on," Greg whispered to himself. "It is just like a simulator. A really complicated simulator where everyone dies if you mess up." His hands moved across the controls and he felt the ship respond. The Zetharians designed their systems for intuitive operation, never imagining that an enemy might try to use them. Greg found the navigation controls and began changing the ship's course. In the engine room, Ryan Chen worked frantically at the main computer terminal. He was not trying to control the ship. That was Greg's job. Instead, Ryan was locking out the Zetharian command codes, making sure that the bridge crew could not override what the humans were doing. "How long until you finish?" his sister Karen asked. She stood guard at the door with a captured rifle, watching for enemy reinforcements. 2 more minutes, Ryan replied, his fingers flying over the alien keyboard. "Their security is complex, but it has patterns. Everything has patterns." On the bridge, the Zetharian captain, a veteran named Korvik, stared at his displays in disbelief. The humans had taken over half his ship. His security teams were being overwhelmed. The cargo bay was completely lost. And now someone was changing the ship's course. All hands repel boarders, Korvik ordered. Kill the humans. Kill them all. Do not let them take this ship. But it was already too late. Danny and his team burst onto the bridge with overwhelming force. Energy bolts flashed back and forth in the confined space. 2 humans fell, their bodies smoking from direct hits. But 3 Zitharians also went down, and suddenly the bridge was in human hands. Korvik lunged at Danny with a powered blade, but Danny had been expecting it. He rolled under the attack and brought his stolen rifle up, firing at point-blank range. The energy bolt struck Korvik's armor and did not penetrate, but the force of the impact knocked the captain backward into his command chair. "Stay down," Danny shouted, keeping his weapon trained on the alien. "Order your crew to stand down or we will vent every compartment of this ship into space." It was a bluff. Danny had no idea how to do that, but Korvik did not know that. For a long moment, the Zitharian captain stared at Danny with hatred. Then slowly he reached for his communication device. "All units cease fire," Korvik said, his voice filled with disgust. "Stand down. The ship is lost." Throughout Transport 7, the fighting stopped. Zitharian crew members lowered their weapons, stunned by what had just happened. In less than 20 minutes, prisoners had taken complete control of the ship. Amy made her way to the bridge, checking for injured as she went. She found Danny standing over the Zitharian captain, his captured rifle still pointed at Korvik's head. "We did it," Amy said, hardly believing the words. "We actually did it." "We took 1 ship," Danny replied. "But there are 11 more transports out there and a whole fleet of warships nearby. This is just the beginning." He turned to Greg, who was now fully settled into the pilot's station. "Can you fly this thing back to Earth?" Greg shook his head. "We would never make it. The moment we turn around, every Zitharian warship in the system would be on us. We would be destroyed before we got halfway there." "Then what do we do?" Kate asked. Danny looked at the displays showing the position of the other ships. He thought about the 2 million humans spread across 12 transports. He thought about Earth broken and occupied. He thought about Emperor Vralthun, sitting safely on his throne, believing that humanity was defeated. An idea formed in Danny's mind. It was desperate and insane and would almost certainly end in death for everyone involved. But it would also send a message that would echo across the galaxy. "Get me communication with the other transports," Danny said. "All of them. We are going to finish what we started." Part 4. The communication channel crackled to life, connecting Transport 7 with the other 11 ships in the convoy. Danny stood on the bridge, surrounded by his exhausted team, and spoke into the Zitharian communication system. "This is Sergeant Danny Mitchell to all human prisoners on Transports 1 through 12. If you can hear me, the uprising has begun. Transport 7 is under our control. If any of you are awake and able to fight, now is the time. Take your ships. Take your freedom." For a moment, there was only static. Then voices began to respond, some clear, others broken by interference, the Transport 4 responding. "We have control of 3 decks. Attempting to reach the bridge. Transport 9 here. Fighting on cargo level. Need support. Transport 2, bridge is ours. Crew is secured." More reports came in. The uprising was not limited to Transport 7. Across the convoy, thousands of humans had used the same methods to wake themselves and attack their captors. Not all attempts succeeded. Transports 3, 5, 6, 8, 10, and 11 remained under Zitharian control. But 6 ships now belonged to the humans. On his flagship in orbit around Earth, General Korax watched the situation unfold with growing horror. The tactical display showed 6 of his transports breaking formation and changing course. "What is happening?" Korax demanded. "Why are those ships not responding to commands?" His communications officer worked frantically at her station. "General, we are receiving distress signals from the transports. The prisoners have escaped. They are taking control of the ships." Korax felt something cold settle in his chest. In 30 years of military service, he had never heard of prisoners seizing control of Zitharian vessels. "It should have been impossible. Send fighters immediately," Korax ordered. "Disable those transports, board them and retake control." "Yes, General." But Danny had anticipated this response. On Transport 7, Ryan had been working on more than just locking out the bridge controls. He had been studying the Zitharian communication protocols, learning how their military systems worked. "Danny, I can jam their short-range communications," Ryan called out from his station. "Not for long, but it might give us a few minutes of confusion." "Do it," Danny replied. Ryan activated the jamming signal. Across the Zetharian fleet, communication systems suddenly filled with static and garbled transmissions. Fighter squadrons launched from their carriers but could not receive clear orders. Warships tried to coordinate but found their signals blocked. It would not last. The Zetharians would adapt quickly, but it gave the captured transports precious time. "Greg, can we reach the Dominion Spire?" Danny asked. Greg checked his navigation display. The massive flagship that carried Emperor Vralthun was positioned near the outer edge of the solar system, preparing to make the hyperspace jump back to Zetharian territory. "We can reach it," Greg said slowly, "but they will shoot us down long before we get close. These transports have almost no defensive capabilities." Danny looked at the tactical display, thinking hard. 6 transports under human control, 6 massive ships each carrying tens of thousands of prisoners. Against the full might of the Zetharian fleet, they had no chance of survival, but survival had never been the point of this plan. "Open a channel to all captured transports," Danny ordered. When the connection was established, Danny took a deep breath before speaking. This was the moment that would define everything. He knew that what he was about to propose would mean death for thousands of volunteers, but he also knew it might be humanity's only chance to strike a real blow against the Empire. "This is Danny Mitchell to all captured transports. We have a choice to make. We can try to run, but we will be hunted down and destroyed within hours. We can try to fight, but we are outgunned and outmatched. Or we can do something that will make the Zetharians remember Earth forever." He paused, letting his words sink in. "The Dominion Spire is in this system. Emperor Vralthun himself is on that ship. We can reach it. We can hit it. We can show every species in this empire that humanity does not accept slavery, that we would rather die free than live in chains." Another pause. Danny could hear his own heartbeat in the silence. "I am asking for volunteers. Everyone who wants to try to escape. We will launch all the escape pods now. No shame in that choice. You have already fought harder than anyone could have asked. But if you want to make sure the Zetharians never forget this day, if you want to send a message that will echo across the galaxy, then stay with me. Help me fly these ships straight into the heart of their empire and show them what humans are really made of." The communication channel erupted with voices. Arguments broke out on several transports. Some people begged to be allowed to escape. Others shouted their agreement with Danny's plan. In those chaotic moments, humanity showed both its diversity and its unity. On Transport 4, Pilot Lieutenant Charlie Wade stood on the bridge listening to Danny's words. Beside him, his friend and co-pilot Nina Parker was crying. "It is suicide," Nina said. "We will all die." "I know," Charlie replied quietly. "But think about what it means. We were supposed to be slaves, Nina. We were supposed to disappear into their empire and be forgotten. But if we do this, no one will ever forget us. Our families back on Earth will know we fought to the end." Nina wiped her eyes and nodded. "Then let us do it right. Let us make it count." On Transport 2, Engineer Helen Brooks had reached the same conclusion. She gathered her team in the engine room and gave them a choice. Half decided to take their chances in escape pods. Half decided to stay and push the engines beyond their safety limits, squeezing every bit of speed from the damaged systems. One by one, the transports reported their decisions. All 6 would make the run, but not all prisoners would stay aboard. The escape pods began launching, hundreds of them scattering in all directions. The Zetharian fleet would have to decide whether to chase the pods or defend the Dominion Spire. On his flagship, Korax made a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. "Ignore the escape pods," he ordered. "Concentrate all fire on the transports. Destroy them before they can reach the Dominion Spire." Zetharian warships moved to intercept. Fighter squadrons broke through the jamming and began their attack runs. Energy beams and missiles filled space as the 6 transports accelerated toward their target. Transport 11 took a direct hit to its engine section and exploded in a ball of fire, killing everyone aboard. Transport 9's shields failed under concentrated fire, and a Zetharian cruiser tore it apart with particle beams. But the other 4 kept coming. The humans pushed their captured ships to maximum speed, dodging and weaving through enemy fire with desperate skill. They had no weapons, no real defenses, but they had something more valuable than either. They had purpose, they had courage, and they had the absolute certainty that they were already dead, which made them the most dangerous enemies the Zetharians had ever faced. On Transport 7, alarms screamed as the ship took multiple hits. Fires broke out on the lower decks. The shields were failing, but Greg kept the ship on course, his hands steady on the controls. "We are not going to make it," Kate said, watching the damage reports pile up. "We do not have to make it all the way," Danny replied. "We just have to get close enough." Through the view screen, the Dominion spire grew larger. It was massive, larger than anything humans had ever built. Its weapons could have vaporized the transports from a distance, but Emperor Vralthun had made a critical error. He had not believed that the primitive humans would actually dare to attack his flagship. By the time he realized the danger, it was too late to bring the spire's main guns to bear on targets so close. "All hands abandon ship," Danny called out over the internal communication system. "Everyone to the remaining escape pods. You have 30 seconds. People ran through the burning corridors of Transport 7, heading for the last functional escape pods. Amy grabbed Danny's arm. "Come with us," she pleaded. Danny shook his head. "Someone has to keep this ship on course." "Go, Amy. Tell people what happened here." Amy wanted to argue, but there was no time. She ran for the escape pods with the others. Only a handful of volunteers stayed behind on the bridge with Danny, Greg, Kate, and Ryan. "I always wanted to be a pilot," Greg said, a strange calm in his voice. "I just thought I would get to retire someday." "We are going to be remembered forever," Kate added. "That is something." Ryan checked the course one last time. "We are locked in. Even if they destroy the bridge, the ship will stay on course." Danny opened one final communication channel, broadcasting on all frequencies. He wanted everyone to hear this. The Zetharians, the humans still fighting on Earth, every species in the Empire. "Emperor Vralthun, this is Sergeant Danny Mitchell of Earth. You wanted humans delivered to you. Here we are." Part 5. Emperor Vralthun stood in his throne room aboard the Dominion Spire, watching the tactical displays with a mixture of disbelief and rage. 4 massive transport ships were bearing down on his flagship, their engines pushed far beyond safe limits, trailing fire and debris but still coming. "Destroy them," Vralthun roared. "Kill them all." But the Zetharian fleet was caught in a moment of fatal confusion. The ships were too close for the Spire's main weapons to target effectively. Fighter squadrons were still regrouping after chasing escape pods. The warships that moved to intercept found their firing solutions blocked by other Zetharian vessels, as everyone tried to position themselves to defend the Emperor. On Transport 7, Danny Mitchell spoke into the communication system, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. The bridge was on fire, consoles exploding, the air thick with smoke, but he kept talking, knowing these might be the last words he ever spoke. "You came to our world expecting us to surrender," Danny said. "You thought we would accept slavery. You believed we were weak because our technology is primitive, but you do not understand what it means to be human. We are stubborn. We are defiant. And we would rather die on our feet than live on our knees." Through the cracked view screen, the Dominion Spire filled their entire view. It was beautiful in a terrible way. A monument to an empire built on conquest and domination. In seconds, they would hit it. Danny thought about Earth. He thought about his parents probably hiding in some refugee camp, wondering if he was alive. He thought about all the people still fighting down on the surface, resisting against impossible odds. He hoped that somehow this sacrifice would give them a reason to keep fighting. "This is for everyone who died in the invasion," Danny continued. "This is for every human child who will grow up free because we refuse to break. This is for Earth." Greg had stopped trying to pilot the ship. There was no need. They were committed now, falling toward their target like a meteor. He reached over and gripped Kate's hand. She squeezed back, her face calm. "It has been an honor," Kate said quietly. Ryan thought about his sister Karen, who had made it to an escape pod. At least she would survive. At least someone would live to tell the story of what happened here. In the engine room of Transport 7, Helen Brooks and her team pushed the reactor past every safety limit. The engine screamed in protest, but it gave them just a bit more speed. Every second counted. Every meter they covered brought them closer to their target. Transport 4 struck the Dominion Spire first. The ship hit the flagship's outer hull at a significant fraction of light speed. The impact was catastrophic. The transport's reactor, already unstable from battle damage, detonated on contact. The explosion tore through multiple decks of the Spire, vaporizing everything within hundreds of meters of the impact point. 3 seconds later, Transport 2 hit a different section of the flagship. Another massive explosion ripped through the Zetharian vessel. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut throughout the Spire, trying to contain the damage, but the impacts were simply too powerful. Transport 7 came in last, aimed directly at the command section where Emperor Vralthun's throne room was located. In the final seconds, Danny looked at the people on the bridge with him. Greg still holding Kate's hand. Ryan checking one last calculation, the handful of volunteers who had chosen to stay. "Thank you," Danny said, "for everything." Then Transport 7 hit the Dominion Spire, and everything turned to light and fire. The explosion could be seen from Earth. Observers watching through telescopes saw a flash in the sky, bright enough to be visible even during daylight in some parts of the world. The Dominion Spire, the most powerful warship in the Zetharian fleet, was critically damaged. Multiple sections were destroyed completely. The command deck, the main reactor, and over 40% of the crew quarters were gone. General Corax watched from his flagship, horror and something like respect warring in his chest. The humans had done the impossible. With primitive technology and sheer determination, they had wounded the pride of the Empire. Emperor Vralthun had survived, pulled from the wreckage of his throne room by his royal guard. But he was injured, his crystalline body cracked and broken. Medical teams rushed him to safety as fires raged through the dying ship. The Zetharian fleet fell into chaos. With their emperor wounded and their flagship crippled, command structure broke down. Different admirals gave conflicting orders. Some wanted to retreat. Others demanded revenge against Earth. The humans had achieved something that no other species had managed in the Empire's history. They had made the Zetharians afraid. On Earth, the news of the attack spread like wildfire through the resistance networks. Prisoners in camps heard whispered stories of humans who had seized alien ships and crashed them into the Emperor's flagship. The details became confused and exaggerated with each telling, but the core message remained the same. Humans had struck back. They had hurt the Empire. They had proven that the Zetharians were not invincible. In the ruins of Chicago, a resistance cell led by ex-police officer Linda Hayes heard the news and immediately launched an attack on the local Zetharian garrison. They used tactics learned from months of observation, hitting supply lines and communication towers. In Australia, former Army Captain Ben Foster coordinated simultaneous strikes on 3 different military outposts. The Zetharians, still reeling from the news about the Dominion Spire, were slower to respond than usual. In South America, Africa, and Asia, similar uprisings erupted. The humans were still outgunned and outnumbered. Most of these attacks were crushed within hours. But each victory, no matter how small, inspired more resistance. Each Zetharian soldier killed was one less occupier. Each piece of alien equipment captured was studied, analyzed, and used against its creators. The escape pods from the transport scattered across the solar system. Some were picked up by Zetharian patrols and the survivors were returned to captivity, but others made it to the outer planets where human mining colonies had gone dark and hidden themselves. Among the survivors was Amy Collins, who immediately began organizing the refugees into fighting units. Karen Chen made it to a pod that landed on Mars, where a small human research base had somehow avoided detection. She carried with her the technical data that her brother Ryan had compiled about Zetharian systems. It was information that would prove invaluable in the months and years to come. General Corax stood before what remained of Emperor Vralthun 3 days after the attack. The Emperor's throne room had been rebuilt in a different part of his new flagship, a lesser vessel that he had been forced to transfer to, while the Dominion Spire underwent repairs. The Emperor looked diminished, his crystalline armor still showing cracks that medical technology could not yet heal, but his eyes burned with rage. "Explain to me, General," Vralthun said, his voice weak but filled with fury, "how primitive slaves nearly killed me." Corax had no good answer. The truth was that they had underestimated humans from the beginning. They had seen the primitive technology and assumed primitive thinking. They had seen the military defeats and assumed broken spirits. "The humans are more dangerous than we anticipated," Corax said carefully. "They are willing to sacrifice themselves in ways we did not predict. They value freedom more than life itself." "Then kill them all," Vralthun ordered. "Every human on Earth. Exterminate the entire species. Make an example that the entire galaxy will remember." Corax hesitated. Genocide was not uncommon in the Empire's history. Entire species had been wiped out for lesser offenses, but something held him back. My Emperor, if I may speak frankly. Speak. The attack on your flagship has already spread throughout the Empire. Every subject species has heard that humans dared to strike against you. If we exterminate them now, they become martyrs. They become the species that wounded the Emperor before being destroyed. It may inspire more rebellion. Vrelthun considered this. His mandibles clicked in frustration. Then what do you suggest? Let me try a different approach, Korak said. I will increase the occupation forces on Earth. I will crush the resistance slowly and thoroughly. I will make humans an example not through quick extermination, but through prolonged subjugation. Let other species see that rebellion is hopeless, that even courage cannot overcome the Empire's might. The Emperor studied his general for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. You have 1 standard year. If Earth is not completely pacified by then, I will give the extermination order myself. Korax bowed and left the throne room. But as he walked through the corridors of the new flagship, he felt troubled. He had bought the humans time, but he did not know why. Perhaps it was professional respect for an enemy that had accomplished the impossible. Perhaps it was something else. Down on Earth, the resistance continued. It would be a long, brutal struggle. Humans would die by the millions. Cities would be reduced to rubble. But they would never stop fighting. The attack on the Dominion Spire had proven something that could not be taken back. Humanity was not prey. They were not slaves. They were warriors who would fight until the last breath left their bodies. In the ruins of Central Park, where the detention camp had once stood, someone had scratched a message into a piece of broken concrete. The Zetharian patrols kept erasing it, but it kept reappearing carved by